my best to keep us on time here today. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. We had over 200 folks register for this, so I know we'll have folks coming in and maybe even leaving it in different points in the presentation. But I want to respect everyone's time. So I'm going to get us moving. Thank you and welcome for joining. Welcome and thank you for joining. It's 9 a.m. And this is the Home Connecticut annual meeting. So I see a lot of familiar faces popping up here, I'm sure for many years. The campaign, Home Connecticut Campaign, is a collective campaign supported by the Partnership for Strong Communities. And Home Connecticut was started back in 2006. And believe it or not, I was a policy analyst at that time, helping to get that effort off the ground. And so for those of you who are new to us, the partnership is a statewide policy and advocacy organization dedicated to ensuring that everyone in the state has a safe, stable home that is affordable to them in an equitable community of their choice where they can thrive. And our organization started Home Connecticut back in 2006 with the goal of bringing together a wide variety of cross-sector partners who all had a stake in housing and affordable housing here in the state of Connecticut. That included folks from the business and education communities, as well as more expected partners like municipal leadership planners, housing developers. And so over the course of many years, we've continued to host an annual meeting. And we've also continued to activate and in recent years reinvigorated the advisory committee of Home Connecticut to put together a legislative agenda and do some more targeted policy advocacy work. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. We'll also be sharing with you today a little bit about what's happening with the campaign. So that campaign update will happen. Chelsea will be delivering that. And suffice it to say, a lot has changed in the housing policy space since 2006. And also not enough has changed in the housing policy space since 2006. And so over the last year and a half or so, Home Connecticut, but specifically the partnership, have been undergoing some conversations, surveys, and a strategic planning process with our partners to really look at our advisory committee, how we're made up, how we operate, and figure out how we can do that better. So we'll be talking some about that and giving you an update on where that work is going. I'll also be sharing with you the legislative agenda today. We'll walk you through the 4 priorities that the campaign has selected for this short session. We'll then move to a panel discussion. So we've got a host of folks here. We've got 2 state reps, Cristin McCarthy-Vahey and Phipps will be joining us for that, along with folks from Home Builders, CCM, and Gallo and Robinson, talking about what we might be looking at this session in terms of budget and legislative action. We'll take a brief break. And then finally, we're going to host a session on what's happening at the federal level with housing policy. The partnership is the Connecticut partner for the National Low Income Housing Coalition. And so we do work closely with them to both inform our congressional partners and work alongside them. And when we can, share information with all of you that's relevant about what's happening at that space. So Tori Bourret from the National Low Income Housing Coalition will be joining us. And many of you I know are interested in hearing about that or staying on for that panel. And I encourage you to do so. So that's our session for today. Again, welcome. I look forward to sharing some more time with you this morning. Housekeeping as we move along. The event is being recorded. You've heard that pop up and go back and pop up again this morning. So we are recording the session. It's going to be a lot of information we share with you today and slides and whatnot. So don't feel like you have to take copious notes. You'll be able to watch the recording again. And much of the material that we'll be sharing today is available on our website. We'll talk about that later. All of you have, as attendees to the session, have entered muted. If you have any tech questions, please send a message in the chat box to our meeting host, Kiley, who many of you are familiar with. If you're having any issues, just direct message her using that chat function. And then please submit all questions in the chat box. So we'll try to hold time at the end of each of the 3 sections to answer additional questions from all of you as we're able. So feel free to pop those into the chat as they come up for you. And if panelists or myself are able to answer them during the presentation, we will. Otherwise, like I said, we'll hold till the end on those. Next slide. All right, so with that, I'm going to turn things over to Chelsea Ross. Chelsea is our Deputy Director here at the Partnership for Strong Communities and has been helping to really design and lead our Home Connecticut strategic planning process. So she's going to give us a walkthrough of what's happening in that space. Chelsea, thank you.
Thanks, Kylie. Can you hear me okay, Kylie? Thumbs up. All right. So good morning, everyone. Chelsea Ross, she, her Deputy Director at the Partnership for Strong Communities. And as Kylie mentioned, over the last year, I've had the opportunity to support the Home Connecticut campaign in several ways, including a process to collectively discuss the need for change, listening to and acting on folks' input, and gaining the support and commitment we need to move forward, also known affectionately as strategic planning. When I describe it the other way, you're like, oh, that sounds interesting versus strategic planning, right? So why strategic planning? Rising housing costs, lagging production, all the issues plaguing Connecticut's affordable housing landscape have been acutely exacerbated by the pandemic, right? The current membership of the Home Connecticut Advisory Committee, supported by the partnership, undertook a strategic planning process with the aim of refining their shared goals and the function and structure of the campaign moving forward. And the plan was to determine the changes, needed in the who, the what, and the how in order to accelerate our progress toward ensuring that everyone in Connecticut has a safe, stable, affordable home in a community of their choice where they can thrive. So the current advisory committee made a commitment to a process and outcomes that are centered in racial equity. They committed to a process and outcomes that authentically integrated the leadership of community members with lived expertise of housing instability, and a process and outcomes that are intentional about who is in the room. So as the backbone organization of Home Connecticut, Partnership for Strong Communities sought to support an authentic and open and transparent strategic planning approach and plan moving forward that's strengths-based, inclusive of community partners, and centered in race equity and the experience of community members with lived expertise. We formed a strategic planning advisory group, which included a cross-sectional diverse group of committed folks to guide that strategic planning process. Members all had a deep investment and commitment to furthering affordable housing in Connecticut and a real commitment to guiding the partnership through this process. This group recommended and connected partnership staff to some key stakeholders for some in-depth individual interviews. And interviewees included representatives from existing collaborations and partnerships that currently work alongside Home Connecticut, but aren't currently represented on the advisory committee, as well as representatives from new collaborations or partnerships that Home Connecticut may need to build in order to better fulfill our role, including representatives from grassroots organizations that represent culturally specific, historically marginalized communities, and voices that we just haven't been hearing from at the Home Connecticut table. These interviews were really critical to better understand the full landscape of existing work to further affordable housing in Connecticut and the strengths and gaps in what work is most important moving forward. So expertise and feedback from these interviews was used as the basis for developing a community survey. The goal of that was to understand the needs of our communities and partners. So questions included, what are the most important affordable housing issues in your work or your community? What's working and could use more support or funding? Where are there gaps in advocacy and action? And what partners do we need to make sure are engaged to ensure equitable action and outcomes? So this survey received just under 300 responses. And that planning advisory group then conducted analysis of all the quantitative and qualitative information gathered during both the planning and assessment phase and the community engagement phase, and highlighted some key findings and recommendations. While we're not going to share the detailed findings from the survey today, I do want to share some important quotes pulled from interviews and survey responses that are really grounding us in how we'll move forward. One person offered, you have to build a group of people that are from low income and affordable housing entities that are living there. If you don't do that, you're not accomplishing anything. You go home to your beautiful home. We think, oh, that's nice, but that's not going to change where we are. You need people within who know where the struggle is. We are here and we are fighting. Another voice shared, every fight has to have the most marginalized at the center. If you aren't going to come up with solutions that impact those people, then you're doing it wrong. Nobody talks about the radical changes that need to happen for things to be materially better for people at the bottom. Another offered, when we only have white people at the table, it's a problem. We can't overcome some of the systemic racism and NIMBYism with only white people around the table. We have to do better at this. And lastly, the campaign can provide space for community members to do what they need to do. Do not provide the content, but provide the container. Through this process, we heard a clear call to ground the work in partnership and collaboration. That Home Connecticut must include representative, equitable, and transparent leadership. And that any organizing, policy, or advocacy has to include analysis and the voices of all stakeholders, specifically communities of color. As a result, Partnership for Strong Communities has committed to organizing Home Connecticut using a collective impact approach. Collective impact simplified is the commitment of people across different sectors, from community members, individuals with lived expertise, government, business, nonprofit, and philanthropy, that are all committed to working on common, complex social issue. And they're doing it in a structured way that leads to change over time. We're committed to intentionality about who's in the room, ensuring not only cross-sector representation, but authentically including the diverse voices needed to generate equitable and breakthrough strategies. We also heard about the high priority levers in affordable housing the community felt needed to be addressed, including reducing the cost burden of housing, investing in distressed neighborhoods, increasing diversity of affordable housing locations, increasing available financial resources for affordable housing development, increasing diversity of affordable housing types, addressing housing segregation and racially segregated communities, and the need for increased focus on home ownership opportunities, just to name a few. We also heard about the need for attention to specific groups, including increased coordination and collaboration among affordable housing developers, more focus on tenant rights, vision, and voice, and the need for more municipal and public education on affordable housing issues. So once a new advisory committee has been finalized, Partnership for Strong Communities is committed to supporting the committee and identifying and forming key working groups to allow for deeper dives and increased coordination on key issues like housing justice, development, etc. And lastly, we consistently heard about the value of forming and supporting the container, the coordination necessary to ensure collective goals and mutually reinforcing activities. We heard about the critical role of research and data and the need for consistent, clear, unified messaging. A statewide effort that brings together diverse organizations to share leadership and drive toward a common goal benefits from a backbone organization that can support the vision and strategy, coordinate the structure and the activities of the collective impact effort, mobilize funding, and advance policy work. Partnership for Strong Communities is committed to improving our ability to serve in this role, including creating an environment that supports honest, creative dialogue, encouraging open and frank discussion of issues, and soliciting the views of people with different perspectives. We're committed to supporting leadership of and support for individuals with lived expertise, identifying resources to pay for their expertise and time. We're committed to providing capacity for data and research to support and inform priorities identified by Home Connecticut partners, as well as supporting advocacy for changes in legislation or administrative policies and procedures that have disproportionately negative impact on populations that have been marginalized. Lastly, we've committed to increasing research and educational offerings for Home Connecticut partners and wider audiences. So before I hand it back to Kiley to talk about Home Connecticut's advocacy in 2021 and our collective legislative agenda for 2022, I'm going to briefly share some of the work the partnership has been doing to increase available research and educational offerings over the last year. So in 2021, we hosted the second annual Affordable Housing Conference, which explored challenges, shared best practices, and coalesced us around critical next steps to address the key affordable housing issues in our state. The virtual conference included over 375 attendees. I see lots of you here today across 3 days and 20 sessions. Presenters and attendees came from across the affordable housing sector and beyond, including those from the municipal level, state level, and other sectors, as well as the general public. Recordings from the YouTube channel. I'll drop that link in the chat in a minute. We're also looking forward to hosting a third annual Affordable Housing Conference in 2022. So save the dates for November 14th through 16th on your calendar. and start thinking about sessions you'd like to see or present in. Partnership for Strong Communities has also just released its yearly update on the state of housing affordability in Connecticut. Housing in Connecticut 2022 provides a quick 2-page primer on Connecticut's need for stable, affordable housing. And I'll drop that link in the chat as well. In addition to Housing in Connecticut, Partnership's research team have published several pieces over the last year that work to expand available information on contemporary affordable housing topics. 2 recent publications include Trends and Changes in Assisted Housing in Connecticut, a view from the Affordable Housing Appeals List from 2002 to 2020, by Partnership Policy Director Sean Gallo, which examines the last 19 years of data from the Affordable Housing Appeals List and provides some key findings. And Connecticut's Ignored Homes, the case for producing and preserving small multifamily housing. Also authored by Gallo, the report argues that modestly sized apartment buildings are the foundation of Connecticut's affordable rental housing, and that continued building and preservation of these units is needed to lower the cost of rent and improve housing choice in the state. Both these publications and a host of others can be found in the publications section of our website, another link that I'll add for you all in the chat. And finally, but excitingly, in 2021, the Partnership for Strong Communities launched the Research Associates Program. The program hires freelance writers and researchers, specifically targeting young Black, Latinx, and people of color to produce policy and research materials on affordable housing and homelessness in Connecticut. 2 of the inaugural Research Associates published pieces last year, including Roadblock to the Middle Class, an essay on the impact of housing insecurity in America, authored by writer and researcher Jamil Ragland. Ragland gives us an inner look into his life experiences navigating housing in Connecticut and offers his perspective, the pitfalls that may trap many Americans trying to find a home. Planner and researcher Talia Giraldo authored Building a More Equitable Home Buying System, which provides an overview of how exclusionary practices have contributed to a massive gap in homeownership between Black and white families, and provides a roadmap for building a more just state through homeownership programs. Several other research associates are actively working on pieces which will be released this year, and the partnership is committed to continuing to hire, support, and amplify the original research and writing of community leaders. I'll also drop a link to more information about the Research Associates program in the chat as well. And our team is always interested in hearing from you as it relates to research questions, policy analysis requests, and media efforts or story ideas. So we're looking forward, and I'm looking forward to continuing to advance this work with each and every one of you over the coming year. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Kiley.
Yeah, thank you, Chelsea. I want to note too, we had 2 other folks just published within the last week or 2 weeks. Some additional work. Alexis Meehan posted on our blog and has a great piece that combines sustainability and housing, specifically looking at trees and the health of communities and housing. And that's a really great piece. It's available on our blog. And then Daisy Correga, who's also a research associate, published in the Hartford Courant, I believe it was last week, a piece about immigration and demographics in Connecticut. So those are should be available up on our website shortly. Again, Alexis's blog is there. It's a great program. And I also want to thank American Savings Foundation and Graustein for supporting that program throughout the year. We're always looking for new research associates. So if you're a young person or you know someone who might be interested in publishing with us, there's information on our website about the Research Associates program. Also just want to thank some funders who are going to be helping and have helped support the strategic planning work that Chelsea just identified. Of course, Melville Charitable Trust, Bank of America has come through with a big grant to support Home Connecticut over the next 2 years. Harvard Foundation for Public Giving recently awarded the partnership a grant specifically to work on a lot of what Chelsea just talked about. And the National Income Housing Coalition, through the Opportunity Starts at Home program, is working with a partnership with a grant that will help us connect our federal advocacy to this work. So I just wanted to pause and thank those partners that are providing some support and that is really going to allow the partnership to be the backbone, as Chelsea described it, of the work moving forward in terms of Home Connecticut's reboot. So with that, I want to turn it over to talk a little bit about our legislative agenda. So one of the benefits, I think, to having a collective impact campaign, or in the case of Home Connecticut, more of a collective campaign, if you will, the last couple of years, is that we've worked to put together a consensus agenda. So the way that Home Connecticut and our sister campaign, which many of you are familiar with, Reaching Home, work is that we coalesce around a consensus agenda. That means that all the partners on that advisory committee, or in the case of Reaching Home, our coordinating committee, have to agree on an item in order for it to be on our agenda. And that takes a lot of conversation and a lot of work to get to that place. We believe at the partnership, and I know many of our partners agree, that rather than having the partnership dictate which priorities and policies should move forward, that there's more strength in us all bringing our perspectives on policies and legislative work to the table together and coming forth with an agenda that all of our individuals and organizations can stand behind. There's big benefits of this process and of that outcome at the legislative level as well, when we're able to go and talk to legislators and say, this is an agenda that this wide variety of partners supports. These aren't just the priorities of any of these individual organizations or of the partnership, but of this group of stakeholders. Makes for a much easier process in terms of moving those priorities along in most cases. We'll talk a little bit more about what the landscape looks like and how easy or not easy that may be this year. But as we did last year, I wanted to take some time today, the next 15 minutes or so, to walk you through the legislative agenda process and the outcome of that, so that all of you are familiar with the 4 priorities that the campaign has put forward for this short session in 2022. So I'll move on to the next slide. So just so you're aware, we have a Home Connecticut Advisory Committee, as Chelsea noted. That group has been meeting bi-weekly. And really the agenda setting process starts early. We start those conversations in August and September. We facilitate our advisory committee using a tool called results-based facilitation that helps us eventually move to the place of consensus by both narrowing down targets, talking about policy specifics, inviting outside partners to our meetings to present and talk about their ideas. And so by December, our goal is to have an agenda finalized so that the partnership staff, lobbyists, and all of our partners can start having conversations with legislators and key agencies in January. Next. So our legislative agenda outcomes are as follows. 1, invest in affordable housing. So the first item, as it is with often on our agendas, is to preserve existing funding. And while we hope there's not a threat of cuts this year, it's always important that we start out by saying, hey, at least let's make sure that we keep the funding that we identified in last year's biennium budget stable for the coming year. As a reminder, this is an off year since the state sets its budget every other year. So this isn't necessarily a year to make big budget changes, but we want to make sure that the funds that were identified and allocated for specifically housing development in this case remain the same. So again, that's $100 million for a flex fund, of which $30 million is for SSHP, or state sponsored housing portfolio preservation, and $50 million for the state housing trust fund. Next.
Kylie, just these are the outcomes from the 2021 reviewing.
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I wanted to make sure. If you want me to jump ahead,
I was thrown off. So yes, this was our ask for last year, and we're moving it forward again this year. Go ahead with the next one. Okay. So here are the items that we had on last year's agenda, so you can see what was successful and what wasn't. Oftentimes this is where we start our conversations and looking at whether there are things that we were unsuccessful in last year that we want to move forward, and what we were successful in moving forward. So many of you know, permitting accessory dwelling units as of right was something that was moved forward, although with an opt-out provision. Eliminating the character of the district was something that was also passed. These were part of Public Act 21-29, which many of you knew as is House Bill 6107. That was something that both the partnership, Home Connecticut, and many partners had been pursuing for several years. So we were glad to get that through. It was replaced with the term physical site characteristics. Establishing the Commission on Connecticut's Development Future was something that was an outcome of that bill as well. I know I see several of you on here who are serving on that commission with myself and many others. And then finally, requiring P&Z training. Again, this was something that the partnership, Home Connecticut, and our partners had been pursuing for a couple years prior to this last session, and we're able to get through. That will include some training on fair and affordable housing. Okay, next slide. So for purposes of this year's agenda, I already talked about our preservation item, but we really wanted to sort of frame these asks in a way that aligns with the goals of the Home Connecticut campaign, which we'll be refining over the next year through our strategic planning process. But first was to advance housing justice by supporting low and moderate income households. The second goal, as I talked about already, is invest in affordable housing development. And then the third is to remove barriers to building diverse housing options. So under the advanced housing justice by supporting low and moderate income households this year, the Home Connecticut campaign, supported by the Reaching Home campaign, which has the same ask, made a big ask around RAPs, or rental assistance program. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, RAPs are flexible, supportive, tenant-based voucher subsidies that help pay the difference between what someone can afford to pay to 30% of their income and rent. We have a line item, the DOH Housing and Homeless Services line item, which includes those RAPs. And so the ask here is to expand that line by at least 20 million, which would provide rental assistance to roughly 2,000 more low-income households in the state of Connecticut. Next. So what are vouchers and sort of what are the need here? So we wanted to provide you with some framing and a little bit of statistics. So by the numbers, only about 20 to 25% of households that are eligible for a tenant-based subsidy like a voucher actually receive one. And in Connecticut, about 47,000 households receive some form of rental assistance, although there's over 148,000 households, which qualify as extremely low income. And in 2021, Connecticut administered a little over 5,500 RAP vouchers, which totaled about 71 million. So again, our ask is on top of that. And in January 22, there were currently 3,600 households on the wait list. And I understand that wait list hasn't been open for a while. Next. We also want to talk about the cost burden specifically on communities of color. And this is national data, but we wanted to share it here. So as not surprisingly, the cost of housing and specifically cost burdened households are disproportionately households of color. So we wanted to share some data for you on that. It's something that we are going to be highlighting and are highlighting and talking about with legislators, and something that the campaign will be focusing more on as we look at disparate outcomes, even within the programs that we support. Next. I don't have to say most of this to you, but as you all know, rental assistance vouchers, and specifically rental assistance, are really critical. And we saw that during the pandemic. One of the benefits that RAPs have is that because they're flexible and flex with a household's income, it creates an opportunity to protect and insulate households from things like the pandemic, from job losses that may have arisen in the last 2 years. And it also provides the choice, as we know, there are still many restrictions on that choice, but choice where folks want to live. So it allows families, households to move to a location, a city where they may have a job, access to childcare, family, or what have you. They're not tied, and that subsidy is not tied to a specific building. It's tied to that specific household, and allows for their income to grow or unfortunately shrink, as it may have in the last couple of years, and still keep them housed. So many of those households that had Section 8 vouchers or RAPs were not accessing, for example, the Unite CT program because their income was, but the voucher was restructured to fit with their new income, be that lower or higher, to again insulate them. So it's a really important tool and often is less expensive than constructing new units, right? Agenda item number 2 is what I talked about in the beginning. So this is preservation of those funds that we were successful in obtaining during last year's session. Next. And just a few notes of this that I think are important to talk about with legislators and other partners is that housing production in Connecticut is decreasing. So we're at a 10-year low in issuance of permits for new housing construction. I don't have to share with all of you that the just the construction process in general has been made much more difficult due to labor and supply shortages over the last couple of years as well. In Connecticut overall, according to our friends, the National Income Housing Coalition has a deficit of 86,000 available and affordable units for extremely low income households. So that means households which are eligible for some type of assistance, right, are just not able to access a unit, period. There's not a unit that's affordable to them in our state. We know there's a lot of economic benefits to investing in affordable housing. We actually have a one-pager about this on our website, which you can use, and this graphic is part of that. But I think it's important as we share this information with policymakers to let them know that investing in affordable housing has positive outcomes, not just for the individuals who live in that housing, but also for the communities. Oftentimes there's misinformation out there that affordable housing development reduces property values in surrounding areas. That's not true. In fact, that in most cases, the housing actually results in increased jobs, increased tax revenue frequently for municipalities, and also provides, as I noted, disposable income for families, which is then spent oftentimes on groceries or childcare or other things in that local community. So for every $4.50 of private investment, affordable housing leverages $4.50 for every dollar of state funding. And so I think that's an important, it's an important leverage point to note, folks. Our third option falls under our remove barriers to diverse housing options. So this year, the Home Connecticut Advisory Committee felt strongly that continuing to talk about transit-oriented development and put forth some policy recommendations on that was really important. This is something that came up in the last session and was discussed, obviously, not only as part of 6107, but other bills. And so what we've put together here is a proposal which aligns with our friends at Desegregate Connecticut and really targets allowing or reducing zoning restrictions around CT fast track and train stations. We know there's been several successful developments around train stations. I'm looking at Charlie Adams. I know we have a great one in Meriden, and there's many others. Whether they're fully affordable or some mixed income, there's a lot of benefits to that, and we'll talk about them, talk about that shortly. Next slide. So the proposal is that each of the 40 municipalities with a rail station or a bus or rapid transit station will permit housing as of right at an average density of 15 dwelling units per acre within a half a mile of that transit hub or that station. Larger scale developments within a transit area will include a set aside of 10% of units restricted as affordable. And then municipalities should be encouraged to provide density bonuses to developers that can set aside units for affordable housing with transit. So again, kind of adding a carrot there to encourage developers to really put in some units that are affordable to folks at moderate and low incomes, and to offer things like density bonuses to make that more feasible in some cases if there are not subsidies available. Next. I don't have to tell many of you why access to our rail systems are too restricted, and why many of our communities have zoning regulations and rules in place that make it more difficult to develop around transit hubs than probably is best for all of us. Sean notes here that 15 out of 40 municipalities ban multifamily housing near transit stations, and he's working on some additional information that we'll be sharing with all of you through a one-pager that go into a little more detail about this. But as you know, most transit towns require large minimum lot sizes, sometimes 1 or even 2 acre lot sizes near transit or in those towns where there's otherwise a real opportunity to focus on economic growth in these areas. Finally, noting too, the least racially diverse towns have extremely restrictive zoning near transit stations, and we've been focusing on some more research around that as well. Next. And again, many of you are familiar of the benefits of housing diversity in transit-oriented communities, not the least of which is increased tax revenue and economic benefits to those municipalities, but also job access, increased ridership, more walkable mixed-use developments lead to more business growth, better safety for pedestrians and cyclists. All of these things are benefits that I think Connecticut should be taking seriously, and I know many of you feel the same way. So Again, we'll be sharing much of this with you in our one pager, so you have those kind of talking points as you have conversations about this in your communities and with your policymakers. Next. Also, just noting quickly that Massachusetts already has a policy in place that's similar to this, and New York's governor recently also proposed something similar. So those are things that we'll be following and talking about more as we talk about transit-oriented development this session. Next. And then finally, item number 4, noting that every Connecticut community has an obligation to contribute to meeting the housing needs of our state, including permitting its fair share of housing for both low and moderate households. So the Home Connecticut Advisory Committee felt that it was important to put forward a statement that supports at least at the concept of fair share, noting that our agenda setting process is often earlier, and I know our friends at Open Communities Alliance are putting together some legislation, or have come up with some legislation around this, but really just the concept of setting some targets and really supporting towns, but identifying that towns have an obligation, our municipalities have an obligation to support affordable housing needs in our state. Next. And again, many of you are familiar with some of this map and the racial demographics that sort of cross with our available affordable housing options and where we develop housing. So 70.6% of Connecticut's non-white population lived in 31 municipalities, which are exempt from 830G, so meaning that their housing stock through the state's affordable housing appeals list exceeded 10% affordable housing, while the total population in exempt municipalities only represents 44% of Connecticut's total population. So again, we have some out of whack statistics from a racial diversity standpoint, which many of you are familiar with, and where our housing is located. And so that again goes to support this concept that we really need to find ways to both incentivize and in some cases have some sticks associated with really creating targets and really encouraging towns or mandating that towns start developing more affordable. Next. So there's different things that you can do throughout the session to help with this agenda. One, share it with your networks. You can also sign up for legislative update emails if you haven't already. And if you are meeting with legislators throughout the coming session, have the agenda ready to share with them, or if there are specific priorities that you and your organization align with, feel free to use the information we have in our agenda or our one-pagers to help support that. The more I think that we can coalesce around similar concepts and be kind of singing off the same sheet, the more likely we are to be successful. And then again, as the time comes for things like testimony and hearings, the partnership does share information with all of you through our listservs. Sometimes that's draft testimony or letting you know when hearings are coming up and where you might want to, where to sign up and that sort of information. So that's available through our communication chains. Next. And noting too that our agendas as well as our fact sheets, again, template testimony and the housing research that Chelsea talked about earlier are all available on our website, pschousing.org. You can go under the advocacy link specifically to access our agenda. Next. All right, I'm going to pause there and see if there are any Q&A that folks want to throw in the chat. I'll just give it a minute before we transition to our next section. Any questions on the agenda that the advisory committee put together? A question about how did you arrive at the financial impact of affordable housing? So that dollar of investment that leverages 4.5 is a statistic from our friends, the Connecticut Association of Home Builders, that we've been sharing for a couple of years now. And those numbers that we have on that slide, which are also on the one pager on our website, are grounded in some of that data from our home builders. questions? One more. Questions, a very good question about what would be the first, Akeisha, if I'm saying your name right, what would be the first steps to ask HUD and other affordable housing programs to calculate rent by using net income and not gross income? Good question. There's also, as you know, lots of conversation and have been lawsuits and other action around the concept of small area fair market rent and redetermining the way in which we calculate fair market rent, which, as you all know, has a big impact on where and how folks can use housing subsidies, especially with the market being as nuts as it is right now here. This would be a federal question. And so it might be a good question to bring up, Akeisha, on our panel later today with our friends at the National Income Housing Coalition. So I am going to put a pin in that so that we can make sure that Kiley and our NLIHC friends have that for the purposes of their conversation later. Okay, so with that, I will go ahead and move us along, Chelsea, to our panel discussion. So to get us started, I want to quickly introduce our panelists. Here they are for you. And because we see all of us on the screen, because this is a Zoom meeting, we can't, I see a question, I'm sorry, on Laura Wertz's question on New Canaan and Canaan data. Because that's a finite town question, I'm going to boot that to Sean or some other folks within our organization to answer that so we can move along to our next panel. So the panelists we have here today are here to talk about the session generally, the upcoming session. So we have Representative Cristin McCarthy-Vahey representing Fairfield, Connecticut House of Representatives. And she's also, I should know, co-chair of our Planning and Development Committee. Rep Q Phipps from Middletown, new head of our Housing Committee here in Connecticut. Bill Welz, lobbyist with Gallo and Robinson. Zach McKeown with the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities and also part of our Home Connecticut crew. Jim Paris with the Home Builder and Remodelers Association of Connecticut and also part of our Home Connecticut team. And I will do my best to moderate this discussion. So with that, I'm going to get us started here and just ask kind of a broad question about the state of our budget. So specifically talking about the financial situation in which the state finds itself in this session, which is a little different than previous sessions. So I'll just start off by saying, I think there's a lot of information out there that folks are seeing about a big surplus and what that means. How the state is planning on spending that surplus. What does that mean for the state budget? Typically, as I said, in a short year, we're just making small budget adjustments. Is that different this year? And so I'm going to ask if Bill is here maybe to kick us off with a conversation about the sort of the state of the state in terms of financial lay of the land. So Bill, if you're around, I can see you on my screen. So there you are. Okay.
Yeah, I'd be happy to kick it off.
And then I'll turn it over to the rest of the panelists to see if they have anything to chime in on there.
You know, what I like to say about where the state is at right now, if I could put something kind of flashy to it, is I say that Connecticut got a Christmas bonus, but we are maintaining a very large credit card debt from things that we bought that we have not yet paid for. We're going to be ending this fiscal year. A new adjustment just came out. We're going to be ending this year with a $1.48 million surplus and a volatility transfer of $969 million. That's the good outlook for Connecticut, right? Like we got this extra money coming in. The budget reserve fund is already reached its maximum amount that it can hold in. It can only hold in 15% at a time of the total FY23 budget. So there's going to be a large transfer of money because with all that money coming in, the budget reserve fund, which is the rainy day fund, will be at 26% total. So there's going to be a large transfer of money that's going to go to pay down long-term obligations. Those long-term obligations are the unfunded pension liability and the unfunded teacher retirement that has not been addressed by the legislature at least for better part of 20 years until the last governor took office and the legislature and the governor decided that it was time to start paying down our long-term debts. So, short-term cash infusion, long-term debt. That's what the legislature is grappling with. That's what we're grappling with as advocates, because we all have things that we want to see happen. We have good ideas for how to spend money coming in, but we have to be able to figure out a way to kind of mitigate those two circumstances. A lot of that money came in from infusion of federal funds, helped out a lot. CARES Act and ARPA funds helped the legislature kind of take some items off of from that would usually be paid by general fund. They were able to use some of that with the federal funds coming in. That was a big help. That faucet's about to trickle down to a slow drip. And we're not going to see those kind of cash infusions again, probably because the pandemic is on its way out. There's also additional revenue from Wall Street gains and captures and sales tax. I mean, Connecticut has had a booming economy because of the pandemic. We're seeing a shift of people moving back to Connecticut. Fairfield seeing, Cristin can probably attest to it on the call, is seeing an influx of people moving into houses and coming back to the suburbs of Connecticut instead of living in New York. And Connecticut is reaping some gains on that, and it's good, but it will be a while till we see what the long-term outlook of that success is going to bring, because we do have deficits in the upcoming out years. So I guess that's the way I would kind of start it. And I would definitely point to my two legislative friends here who are more in it than I am, if they have anything to add on it. But that's what I would say generally about our budget situation going into this session.
Thanks, Bill. Rep. Phipps or McCarthy-Vahey, you guys want to respond or just stay quiet on this one?
I'm happy to jump in. And Kiley, thank you so much. And to all of you partners who have literally given your lives to this work, thank you for what you do. I would concur with what Bill said and add a couple things. The intense pressure on our healthcare workforce, including mental health, and there's an article today in the Mirror about that, but there's certainly going to be pressures, budgetary pressures, and additions related to that. Also, we have the infrastructure grant. There are a lot of competitive grants that are going to be part of that program that will require matching funds, uniquely from, some of those from municipalities, but also from the state. And because of the way we've chosen to fund or not fund transportation in our state over the past number of years, there are going to be pressures there as well, because we're, that pressure of we don't want to miss out on those additional available funds. So those are some of the other competing pressures. And I couldn't agree more. We've got tens of billions in the unfunded liabilities. And I appreciate Bill pointing out that indeed Governor Malloy and the legislature did start very directly addressing those, and we've made progress, but we're going to have to keep at it, because that's making sure that we're upholding the promises that we made to those people who have served us for so many years.
No, that's a great response, and glad to be following. So my good friend, and it's going to be definitely best friends in this next upcoming session with how collaboratively the Housing Committee and Planning Committee are going to have to work together. So good morning, everyone. I'm Q Phipps, new chair of the Housing Committee. Really glad to be here, just particularly with PSC. I do feel like in some ways this is like a full circle conversation about I'm going to age myself a little bit. 20 years ago, starting some of this advocacy work with Young Energetic Solutions, talking about what one day being able to have real relationships with legislators to talk about housing policy will look like and how to move it. So to be on this side and actually be that legislator, it really is close to my heart. So I think the key word for our work in 2022 is using the word "and" as much as possible. I think so often we use the diametric choice of like, or we can do this, or we can do that. And as many times as we can use the word "and," it is going to make the state of Connecticut in a much better position. And I think there's one particular thing that I want folks to really remember as we're coming up with how to continue to put Connecticut on the right track. And that is the fact that Connecticut is a desirable place to live. And not just for our location between New York and Boston, but for our unique assets that we have right here. We have a school system that has its opportunities, but still generally speaking, really great. Numerous employers that folks would want to work for, some of the best institutions of higher education in the entire country, if not the entire world, all right here in Connecticut, and things that you would want to do. So what we have to do is find solutions that make sure that Connecticut is a desirable place to live. And I think that comes with things like protecting the safety net, having true housing choice throughout the entire state of Connecticut, not just the suburban areas, not just the urban areas, not just the rural areas, but for the entire state. We have to make sure that we have a transportation network so we can get folks like to and from, whether it's home or to work or school, so on and so forth. And the more we can say the word "and," the stronger off we will be.
Yeah, thanks, Rep. Phipps. I see Zach, you coming off mic if you want to chime in, and then on this one, and then we'll move on to another question.
Absolutely. I just wanted to add a couple of things. I think, Bill did a great job of explaining kind of, our long-term difficulties and how that's going to affect, funding going forward. I think CCM's been, very vocal about the concern that we have with the unfunded liabilities going forward, the tens of billions of unfunded liabilities. And, CCM as an organization was happy to see that contribution for FY22. And, any payments, into these retirement funds and funding them is going to free up more money for, freeing up other resources for other priorities going forward. So, a lot of our municipal officials and CCM has voiced that concern. And, we hope that there's a continued effort to really try to pay down these critically underfunded fund accounts. So I'll just add that. And thanks. I'm Zach McKeown, by the way, and I work for CCM. So
Thanks, Zach. So on that note, having kind of set the table for where the state is from a fiscal standpoint, what, if any, housing related concepts do you expect may come up, or that you're specifically interested in trying to move forward or support this session? Why don't I start with Jim, since we haven't heard from you yet? So what are you hearing about what housing related issues may be taken up this year?
Sure. No, that's thank you for the question. And I'm Jim Paris. I'm the CEO of the Home Builders and Remodelers Association of Connecticut. Thank you for having me here today. I imagine that's a question that people listening in today would much rather hear the legislators on the panel talk about. But I'm happy to chime in. What we've, and let me say this, Representative Phipps, I loved your opening commentary about the word and I'm going to use that in my conversation here. We're hearing a lot of conversation this year about the need for affordable housing. And we're also hearing a lot of conversation about climate change and climate change resiliency and energy efficiency. And I think that's a great place where the word "and" can be utilized, right? Those two conversations shouldn't be mutually exclusive, and nor should they be held in a vacuum. We have a lot of concerns at the Home Builders Association about the consistency of our code development, the predictability and the uniformity of our code development. And certainly when talking about energy efficiency, folks need to be cognizant of the cost and the impact on affordability moving forward, right? So those conversations should happen, and resiliency is an incredibly important conversation to have. But certainly it shouldn't be held in a vacuum, and conversations should be simultaneously occurring about affordability and climate change resiliency. So, I would love to see real conversations happen between the Environment Committee and Planning and Development and Housing around these conversations. And really talking about how we can incentivize the resiliency efforts of home builders and the the resiliency of our infrastructure for our municipalities. So that's certainly one thing I'd like to see. I have a whole list of others, but I'm sure you want to hear from the legislators on this panel.
Yeah, sure. But if our legislators want to chime in, feel free.
I would love to add to that, Kiley. Life is about and it's about connection, and everything is connected. COVID has taught us that, or at least attempted to teach us that. The fact that Jim is bringing up resiliency and coastal issues and climate, Senator Cohen and I met recently to talk a little bit about some of the overlap with environment and planning and development related to coastal resilience. And we're hoping to do a couple of sessions with the Coastal Caucus this year, just informational sessions to help support our municipalities as well in terms of what tools they can use. What do we need to talk about this session? The numbers are really staggering. I was on with the the Opening Doors Fairfield County group the other day, and the stat that they gave us was that over the need for units, 25,000 or so in the 0 to 30% of area median income. And Sean, Kiley, anyone else, feel free to correct me with my numbers. But that building permits for Fairfield County from 2010 to, I believe, 18 or 19. So don't quote me on the numbers. We'll go to the people who are great with the sources, but are somewhere in the 6,000 plus range, 6,000 to 7,000. And Sean, if you want to correct me in the chat, please do. But those permits were not just for the affordable units. And, one of the questions that I got from someone when I was sharing those numbers was, well, where are all those people right now? And I think that's part of the story that we need to help tell, especially neighbors here in Fairfield County and some of our suburban communities. We have to be able to look more at what we're doing. And we're going to need to continue to combat, and I hate to use the word combat, but educate as well, people in the community. There is just a regular resistance, and that's putting it mildly. So what are we going to talk about? We need to talk about the TOD. And that's, again, for our environment. It's for the people, our neighbors in need who are living in untenable situations, and for our economic development, for all those reasons. I think that's, I'll leave it there. I don't want to monopolize because Rep. Phipps, I'm sure, has more to add.
And this is why you do not follow Representative McCarthy, because it's really hard to follow. I do think the word truth is going to be another major factor this one. And we're going to have to start getting people to relay their own truth so we can get to the real crux of the issues. And I also think that there's a heck of a lot of room to realize that a lot of our ideas and a lot of our values are one and the same. So one of my priorities, and I don't say my priorities, but I think a lot of our priorities is that we need more housing, period. We do. We need more housing. So if we have a group called the Home Builders that want to build more homes, and we have advocates saying that we need more housing, I feel like we have a really good start for a relationship. And that is the sort of process that I think we need to go in. And here's it. There's multiple examples, but I'm going to give one in particular that's literally close to home. My wife is from Greater Kansas City, but went to school at KU, Kansas University in Lawrence. Lawrence is very analogous to UConn, to Stewart's. Her apartment there was for a 2-bedroom, $400. If you had a $400 to get you a place to live in anywhere in the state of Connecticut, what that means is you have 2 or 3 other roommates, at least. And if we have very similar communities, but vastly different prices and pricing, and we have a clear demand, which is a good thing. We want high demand for people to want to come to Connecticut. The only way to fix that economic equation is to build more supply. That's the only way. So I think the moment that we can get all of our different stakeholders, the developers, the environmentalists, our school systems, residents, housing advocates, so on and so forth, we can get us all together and start with the one idea that we need more housing. And we need to do it in an economically friendly way. We need to do it in an environmentally friendly way. If we could start with that we need more housing, I think the 1% that we either disagree on or may see things a little differently or have things to work out, we can figure out the 1%. But it's about first and foremost, starting with the 99%, that we agree on a heck of a lot of stuff.
Yeah, thanks for Phipps. Zach, I saw you come off. Do you want to respond to that before I move on? And maybe
Yeah, for sure. So I think something that we can definitely revisit if if there's appetite to do it, and that's really is revisiting Public Act 2129, which was explained to in the presentation before this. And I think that process was very inclusive, and it took CCM countless of hours of negotiation and working with our municipal officials to get all on the same page on, ultimately supporting changes that were passed in that legislation, to much of Representative McCarthy-Vahey's leadership, working with all stakeholders on that. I think there's, for the municipal officials, an understanding that those transit-oriented development areas are crucial, right? They're absolutely crucial. And when CCM this year has started developing their legislative program, and municipal officials and our legislative process, and we started talking about this, revisiting this concept of transit-oriented development, I think there was an understanding that parking requirements are an obstacle to transit-oriented development and economic development. And I think there's a recognition among our members that getting more housing built, especially near those primary transit stations, is crucial. And so, when we had those conversations and talked amongst our municipal officials, our legislative program specifically deals with capping those parking requirements, depending on what kind of housing or / unit you have, because I think everybody can agree that those parking requirements can be pretty onerous and prevent housing to be built around those areas. So I think that's something that CCM definitely wants to have conversations about going forward. Even though it is a short session, I think it's something that we can get done, and CCM supports. So
thanks, Zach. I saw Rep. Phipps, your hand up first, and then Jim.
Yeah, I just wanted to add about the TOD. And I think another thing that we're going to have to do is use more inclusive language or cut out some of the jargon, right? So when we say TOD, I think we have to hold one another accountable for what that really means, because I think that leads to a lot of interpretation, and also I think a lot of history and a lot of rigmarole, for lack of a better word. So we have to be very specific. And the best example I can give is Montgomery Mill in Windsor Locks, which has literally boomed their local economy, which literally saved multiple restaurants because this place was built. And when you ask folks, do they like that property? They'll say, oh yeah, it's beautiful. They renovated a mill, so it's environmentally friendly. I think they had maybe not zero emissions, but it's low emissions. And it's not the station not even built yet. The station is coming and folks are already moving in. It's that exciting of a project. So then I asked the question of well, where else can you build a very similar project anywhere on the Metro North line? And the answer is, according to our current zoning rules, nowhere. So when we say what we like about the project, I want us to be more specific. So when I'm looking at that project, what things do I think would be viable, both economically and also interest-wise for our entire state? I think it's the number of floors in order to increase density in the housing. I think we're talking about, as Zach had said, the lower amount of required parking per unit. The reason that you move next to the train station, so you don't have to have a car. So why we need 2 or 3 cars for this, so there's 1 or 2 bedroom space doesn't make any sense. It's also very difficult to redo a mill for a lot of our cities because of both local and state rules. These are the sort of things that we have to talk about and be very specific so we can move forward together.
Jim, go ahead, and then I'll take Brett, McCarthy-Vahey, and Bill.
Thank you. So, you know, I think what we need to be cognizant of is the fact that nationally, housing construction is on fire. People are building left and right. The state of Connecticut has seen reduced housing permits for the last 2 years. You know, we could arguably say that we've been building at 2009 recession levels, you know, for nearly a dozen years now. And all while certainly in 2009, when the bottom fell out of the market, you know, there was a slowdown in production, but that slowdown in production nationally really was just a blip in time. Production skyrocketed after 2010, 2011 nationwide, whereas Connecticut and a few other states remained at recession levels. And we have to ask ourselves why that is, right? I mean, that's the big question. You know, certainly we have the same workforce development issues that they've had, that folks have nationally, probably maybe a little more acutely, but yet we're struggling, right? So I would say let's focus on that. Let's focus on the why and address the why. You know, I would say, I mentioned workforce development. That's a conversation that really hasn't happened with specific to residential construction as loudly as I'd like to hear it. You know, certainly Governor Malloy in the past had a real focus, and certainly Governor Lamont has carried the mantle on manufacturing and workforce development and manufacturing. Well, you know, Connecticut needs that sort of moonshot conversation about workforce development in residential construction. The average age of a plumber and electrician in the state of Connecticut are pretty much the highest in the country at around 65 years of age. That's a real problem. In 2009, when the economy fell out, the bottom fell out, a lot of our you know, workers in the residential construction industry went from you know, residential to commercial, or just plain left the state or left you know, construction altogether. And we've never really recouped those employees. And certainly supply chain issues and high cost of buildable lots, you know, all contribute to the issue. But workforce development is something that we can address and that we can deal with, whereas supply chain issues are more national and international in scope.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. This is a sobering setting about the state of our housing construction, which of course affects affordability on multiple levels, right? Not just for the folks not having housing, those tradespeople, but additionally not having the tradespeople to build the housing. Rep. McCarthy-Vahey, and then I'll jump to Bill, and I'll try to wrap it up with one last question, or maybe two if we can.
I'll be quick, and I think Bill may have been ahead of me, but I just wanted to answer the question in the chat in terms of other issues that are going to come up before the Planning and Development Committee are the 2018 to 2023 State Plan of Conservation and Development, which we've attempted to pass multiple times. In addition, I'll just note that the Commission on Connecticut's Development and Future will have a subcommittee that will be examining how we develop and implement our State Plan of Conservation and Development. So yes, that is high on the priority list.
Representative Bill?
I would just say two other items that I see bubbling from where I'm at, and some will definitely, I think one of these will definitely touch the Housing Committee. Obviously, the fair share housing proposal is probably going to be back. I know OCA has been out there trying to kind of rewrite the bill and try to make it a little more legislatively friendly so people can get a better grasp of what it's trying to do. But the broad concept of the idea that, that there's municipalities out there that need to have their fair share of affordable housing. It can't just be concentrated in certain areas of the state. So I know they're working hard on that. I know that they're trying to build consensus on that, and it's not easy to do that, but they're doing the hard work. So we'll see where they're at, hopefully in a few weeks. And I know that we'll be touching some committees, and we'll be able to get a better update on that. But that is one that I see coming from where I'm sitting. And then the other one, and I hope Kiley doesn't get mad at me for bringing it up because it is still kind of fresh, but we do have an expiring executive order, 12D, that had some eviction protections in there to make sure that we weren't evicting people if they were going through Unite CT with their landlords and getting funding through. And that order will be expiring February 15th. We are going to be making a proactive push to kind of phase out some of those protections instead of hard stop them on the 15th. And this is becoming a little more pressing as the hour ticks on, because we got an update yesterday that the legislature is actually going to be doing a hearing on Tuesday on kind of the orders that they would like to see standing, and then the orders that they would, that they at least will vote on. So that's kind of putting things in a quicker time vacuum than we were hoping. And, I don't even think we've had a chance to talk with our two friends who are legislative friends who are on here about it, but we will soon. You guys will be getting correspondence on this, but it is something that's going to be coming up, and we do have to figure out a way to make sure that we're not speeding up evictions in a time where we are still kind of phasing out of a pandemic instead of actually out of it. So that's another issue that I see coming up.
Yeah, thank you, Bill, for noting that. And there are some of our Home Connecticut team members that have been working the last 2 days, day and through the night, and developing some language and proposals around that. So it's one of the nice things that the Home Connecticut sort of platform allows us to do, is come together quickly when we need to do that kind of work. Wanted to talk about what you're hearing from your constituents and locally from around the issue of affordable housing. So Jimmy, you have a constituency, and I think you talked about some of their needs, and all of you on the screen have different folks that you hear from in a variety of ways, whether they're members or constituents. And so I just wanted to get a sense from you about whether housing affordability and housing is something folks are talking about with you. Is it an issue that's coming up? And if so, what are you hearing about? Is it things from last session, or are there new concerns or other issues that folks are raising?
I apologize. And that question was geared towards me.
I was just going to say you could answer it. You did a little bit before. If other folks want to share what they've been hearing, that can be good and bad. I think folks all want to hear too. Like, is there pushback that this group of advocates should be aware of? Are there sort of negative connotations of some of the work that we've done that we need to be aware of, in addition to where there might be encouraging signs or conversation about housing?
So, I would say that the Home Builders and Modelers Association has been very supportive of Home Connecticut Steering Committee's legislative agenda last year. Certainly, we would love to see some of those caveats that were in the legislation pertaining to ADUs removed, and certainly that's something that can be addressed. But for us overall, it's there's concerns about really affordable housing in general and building affordably, and how that impacts our residents here in Connecticut. I think we know, and Greg, I know my counterpart has shared these stats in the past, but it's always worth reminding folks that the National Association of Home Builders puts out this great document yearly called Priced Out. And so we know that for every $1,000 that you increase the average, the price of an average home, that you're pricing 154,000 families out of the market. And so we certainly should be cognizant of that when we're seeing, secondary impacts of that, right? When housing affordability or for new homes and for resale, for that matter, decreases, you see a strain on the rental market that we're seeing right now, right? Rent prices have never been higher in the state of Connecticut. Supply chain issues are a real issue for us. Material costs have gone up nearly 19% since the beginning of 2020. Lumber alone is increasing the cost of a single family home by $35,000. There are a lot of strains on the industry right now, and what we should do is all focus on ways to mitigate those strains and find ways to make building affordably easier to do.
Thanks,
I
Jim.
was going to answer, but I thought maybe this time I'll follow Rep. Phipps if he wants to go. You're good?
Go ahead, I think.
Well, Kiley, you asked, the question that you asked was, what are we hearing from constituents and from people who we are serving or working alongside? I shared, obviously, the numbers in the chat in terms of what we're hearing. And before I do that, I do just want to address the ADU piece and the opt-out. The 6107 last year was one of those bills that people all across the spectrum, with how they feel about what should be done related to zoning and housing, were, I think, a lot of unhappy people on both sides of the aisle. And the ADU opt-out provision is one that I think was a frustration for folks. Just a data point on that, the planners have reached out to communities, and they heard back from a sample of Connecticut towns, probably about 40 towns. And the solid majority are planning to change the regulations or comply. And of that small sample, which again, this is not a full survey, but about 25% of towns choosing to opt out. My own community being one of them, though they expanded the ADU options in the community as they did that or are doing that. So back to what I'm hearing about seniors who want to stay in our community. We have a group called Fairfield Senior Advocates, and housing is one of the issues that they talk to me about. And at the same time, I'm hearing from families who are struggling. The housing market, as you referenced here in Fairfield County, is still really hot. It's hard for people to purchase homes here because the prices are stunning, actually. And I had a walk and talk in the neighborhood, and we walked past a house and shared it was a small cape, and it went on the market for $600,000, and it sold with multiple offers within a couple of days. We were shocked. So the other piece is 830G is a continual conversation and a real fight in the community. People are calling. There was an op-ed in the Connecticut Post this weekend, I think, calling for the repeal of 830G. And then folks who are just in neighborhoods where there's an 830G application that was just approved recently, and expressing their, concern, sometimes frustration, outrage. A lot of the voices of the people who need housing and who are just struggling they're not heard, and they're not as loud in the community.
Yeah, that's a great point, Rep. McCarthy-Vahey. I think oftentimes we're hearing sometimes incorrect information as it relates to some of what we're hearing about 830G and other things, but we're not hearing from folks who are not lifting up the voices, I should say, or providing a platform for folks who need that housing within the communities. So that's something that I think is apparent on all of us to continue to work on. Zach, saw you come on.
Yeah, I also just kind of wanted to mention too, I think what we're hearing locally too, that will give us a better idea about that is, we haven't really talked about the ARPA funding that has come in. The plan allocated over $65 billion to municipalities throughout the country, which is a stunning figure. And 1.56 of that is for our municipal general government, and almost $1 billion is for the boards of education. So with that money, there was an interim rule essentially in the summer, which kind of gave guidance about what you could spend that money on. And then there's a final rule that just came out in January that really gave us a clearer understanding of, what that money can be used for. I think it will give us a better idea, because obviously affordable housing has a role to play with, the cash infusion, the massive cash infusion that municipalities are receiving. So actually CCM is doing actually a comprehensive survey about what those funds are being used for. Obviously, they're going to be used for other things as well. But, housing is definitely, needs to be part of that conversation. And it will be interesting to see how many of those funds are allocated to, affordable housing initiatives. So
a good point. And I had a question about ARPA teed up, but I want to hear from Rep. Phipps first on what you're hearing and that question.
Yeah, so this is an issue and opportunity for all income levels, I think all demographics, so on and so forth. So I think the voice that has come up or risen the most, because we have not had a voice, I think, are those that have had trouble with just the basics, right? So our medium income in the state of Connecticut is about $47,000, give or take. If we take after all your deductions, taxes, insurance, so on and so forth, assuming that your housing payment shouldn't be more than 30% of your entire income, that makes your housing payment be somewhere around $800. And I would be very interested to find which communities we can find housing for $800, $822. Doesn't really exist. So as a great politician from New York said, James McMillan, that clearly illustrates that the rent is too damn high. And we are hearing that over and over and over again. And I think what COVID has done is allowed for something that many of us advocates and stakeholders have been saying all along, that this is a problem. We cannot continue to be on this shoestring and this like thin line of being able to be safe and be homed or not. It's a very, very thin line, and we need to do something vastly different super quick. I think we were also seeing from our most affluent that this in Connecticut is a great place to live, but also each property is getting 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 offers going well above market value. Once again, that just clearly shows that there is a demand to have more housing in Connecticut. So from whether it's the most affluent or those that are most needy, there is a need to have housing in all budgets.
Yeah, housing diversity. And I think Rep. McCarthy-Vahey mentioned the statistics about the shortage of units that are available to folks specifically at the lower end of the income spectrum. And where are all those folks, right? We've done a good job in the state of reducing homelessness and targeted investments there. But a lot of those folks are on that shoestring, right? Rep. Phipps, there are folks who are doubled up. There are folks that are living in unsafe conditions. There are folks that are couch surfing or moving from family to family in overcrowded situations. And we don't need to construct a unit for every one of those people, but we need a lot more units, and then housing subsidies to fill the gap between, you noted, that $800 and the reality of most rents being well above $1,000 or $2,000. That it's going to take a variety of different resources, from development to subsidies, to help folks at the lower end of the spectrum, which is what we really care about most. Before we wrap, we're just a little bit over time. I just wanted to ask, we have about a 5-minute break before our next panel. Was there anything that we didn't talk about that anyone felt was really critical to raise? We didn't get to questions in the Q&A. I'm so sorry. This was such a good conversation. I didn't want to stop us. But before we close out, was there anything that any one of our panelists wanted to raise? Bill?
Just wanted to raise, we talked a little bit about the short session, but, it's a 12-week session, it's starting February 9th, launching with the governor's state of the state and the budget that will be dropped on the first day of session. These guys are going to get hard to work, and it's going to be over before we know it. There's a Star Wars joke in here somewhere because we're ending on May 4th. So May the 4th be with all of us when the session gavels out. But just so you guys know, on a short session, legislators can only propose bills related to budget, revenue, and finance matters. Any other policy proposal has to come out of the committee process. So you won't see that large influx of bills where individual legislators are kind of putting their ideas to paper. You're going to see more, budget. They'll do their budget bills, and then the committees will kind of handle those bigger policy topics. There's also going to be emergency certification bills, as I mentioned earlier, probably something related to the executive orders. The budget's always emergency certified. Usually the legislature tries to have hearings on that stuff, and they only do emergency certifications to kind of move the bill to the floor faster. And then I just wanted to also state that we're looking to go a little into virtual again for at least for the month of February. They're talking about virtual public hearings so that as we're phasing out of the pandemic, try to keep as many bodies out of the building. Public hearings are the time when the most people are in the building at once. So virtual hearings are super user friendly. I know I say this every year when I come on here, but if you have never testified in front of the legislature on the stuff that matters to you about housing, your excuses are limited now because the Zoom hearing format is super easy. It's super easy to sign up. They're doing better at tracking where they are in the queue of like who's talking so that you can know when you're going. And you don't need to hang out in the Capitol all day to come and testify. You can hang out from the comfort of your own home. You can sit back in your nice recliner and talk housing. So I encourage you all, if you've never testified before, please use this opportunity, this session, to raise your voice on these issues because it's a great opportunity.
And God bless our representatives for sitting through 24+ hour hearings now that it is happily open to more people. And thank you for your continued listening skills and patience through the session representatives, because it has been a longer slog with those hearings. Jim, and then we'll close it out.
Sure. So, and I'll be quick. I know that we touched upon our ARPA funds. As I understand it, ARPA funds can be designated for expansion of water and sewer. I think that's a real conversation that should be had between our state and our municipalities to identify areas in which we can utilize those funds to create greater density in areas heretofore lacking of that density. And I'll leave you with this thought that while we've had declining permit numbers in the past 2 years, the large majority of that decline is in multifamily housing, right? We've seen about 1,400 less units produced in 2001 compared to 2020. And I do think that talking about infrastructure, sewer, water is a really great way to move us forward. Thank you.
A great point. And I'm sorry we didn't get to talk more about ARPA funding. So we'll have to save that conversation for another day. We have a lot of questions and a lot more conversation. I think we could have done another hour of this. But we do want to take a brief break before our federal panel. So I want to thank all of our panelists today, Zach, Bill, Jim, Rep. Phipps, and Rep. McCarthy-Vahey for joining us. We look forward to what will hopefully be a productive short session. And thank you as always for your time and for information. Thanks all of you for listening and for your questions. We'll do our best to try to catalog them as we can. So we will be back at 10:35. We have a conversation regarding where federal policy is and where that fits into a lot of the conversation we're just asking about housing need as well as development generally. So we will return at 10:35. Go grab yourself a cup of coffee or whatever you need to do, and we'll see you back here shortly. Thanks again to our panel. Much appreciated for your time today.
Okay, I think we can start to come back from our break here. All right. Welcome back, everyone. My name is Kiley Pratt. I'm a senior policy analyst with Partnership for Strong Communities, and I will be walking us through the federal advocacy portion of our agenda today. Federal investment in the creation and preservation of housing is critical in ensuring that households can find and remain in homes that are affordable to them. And as the pandemic has made very clear, it has compounded the eviction crisis and made federal emergency rental assistance critical to making sure that households remain stably housed. Organizations like the National Low Income Housing Coalition work tirelessly to advocate for these critical resources. And it's my pleasure today to introduce one of our friends from NLIHC, Victoria or Tori Bourret, to talk a little bit more about NLIHC and their federal priorities. Tori is an erase coordinator with NLIHC. In this role, she works to advance the coalition's mission and ensure that historic emergency rental assistance appropriated by Congress reaches the lowest income and most marginalized renters it is intended for. She previously served as a housing advocacy organizer at NLIHC, and in that role mobilized and activated the field around the coalition's policy priorities, supervised interns, and managed the state partner network. So I will now turn it over to Tori, who is joining us by phone today. She is having a bit of computer trouble. So Tori, if you're there, you can take it away.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm so sorry. Today has been one of those days. It was working. My computer was working this morning, and then it just decided not to. So really big apologies. But like Haley said, I'm Tori. I work with the National Low Income Housing Coalition. Next slide. And I'm not sure like how many of y'all know about us, so I'm just going to give a brief overview. So we're a national affordable housing nonprofit dedicated to achieving racially and socially equitable public policy that ensures people with the lowest incomes have quality, accessible, affordable homes in communities of their choice. So really our goal is to preserve existing federally assisted homes and housing resources, expand the supply of affordable housing, and establish housing stability. So we all work together. There's a number of teams at NLIHC, research, policy, field, communications teams. We all work together to put forward this mission. The field team works to mobilize our base in the United States and across the country. Our policy team educates lawmakers about housing need and analyzes and shapes public policy. And we're able to do that because the research team studies trends and then analyzes data to create a picture of the need. We're very empirically focused. And so we like to have numbers and be able to show the need in that way, as well as, stories, of course. But next slide, please. And I will just say we're pretty unique in the fact that we focus solely on the needs of the lowest income people. So that's our base, and those are the folks that we prioritize. So I heard a lot of really great statistics, and I know most of you know the needs in Connecticut and across the country. So I'm just gonna give like a really quick couple data points that y'all can use. So 10.8 million folks, or 1 in 4 renter households have extremely low income households and can't afford the rent in the country. And one has to make $20.40 an hour. In other words, they have to work 79 hours per week to afford a 1-bedroom apartment at fair market rent. And there's only 37 affordable and available homes for every 100 extremely low income renter households. Next slide, please. When we're looking at Connecticut, we see that there's a shortage of 86,717 rental homes available to the lowest income folks. And that 69% of these households are severely cost burdened, meaning they spend more, 50% or more of their income on rent. Next slide, please. So we have undertaken the House campaign in the last couple of years because we see the need for multiple solutions to work together in order to solve the affordable housing crisis. It's not enough to address just one issue. You can't just focus on increasing supply without also thinking about, how you can shorten the gap between incomes and the cost of housing. And it's great if you have supply, but if folks are not able to get into those units because they don't have protections like source of income protections, then that unit is not available to folks. So there's a real need to expand tenant protections, provide emergency rental assistance to households facing a crisis, expand and preserve the supply of affordable housing, and then bridge the gap between incomes and housing costs. And so that's what this House campaign is all about. And we've been really ramping it up. And our main focus has been, over this past year, the Build Back Better Act, because that's been taking up most of the space in terms of legislators' priorities. Next slide, please. And a lot of our, I think the legislators that spoke before me just mentioned that they're seeing huge increases in rents, and that is true. I mean, I've been hearing from folks on our state and local implementation calls where we talk about ERA, that this is a really big issue and that there are not any capacity at any other agencies to help. So people are hitting this 18-month mark. So they're, getting out of this program and they don't have anywhere to go. And I think, this shows that we knew that NLIHC knew that there was a huge housing crisis before the pandemic, and it's showing that it's still existing, and we need to think about these folks and how to make sure they can be stably housed. Next slide, please. So, like I mentioned, it's really important that we have these long-term housing solutions now more than ever. So we're, the emergency rental assistance is a great short-term program, but we need more long-term resources so that we can increase housing, so that there's not as much of an increase on rents, and that we, can have more vouchers for folks to utilize. And I think just this has become really apparent, especially with a lot of the discussion we've been hearing about rent increases like 20 or 30%, and just underlying this need. So anyway, sorry. So the Build Back Better was one of our main priorities, is still one of our main priorities over the past year, because it would address a lot of these long-term housing needs. And it's actually like historical legislation. It's the most that housing would ever be funded, which is huge. So affordable housing, I should say. So 1.75, the bill is 1.75 trillion and contains over $150 billion in affordable housing and community development. It had $25 billion for vouchers, $65 billion for public housing infrastructure, and $15 billion for the National Housing Trust Fund. Next slide, please. And I do want to thank you all for your hard advocacy, for the work that you've been doing around Build Back Better, and also for the work you've been doing at the state level to increase resources for the lowest income folks. We need both solutions working together because the need is so great. So in terms of Build Back Better and where we stand right now, it's very uncertain, especially around the housing piece. So Senator Manchin said that he would not support the 1.75 trillion package as it stood. And so that became a really big barrier. They needed his vote, 50 votes in order to pass this legislation under budget reconciliation. So it basically allows Congress to enact legislation with a simple majority vote. So he was a critical vote and he said no. So the next strategy is for President Biden to enact a scaled back version of Build Back Better and focus on a couple of key priorities and then repackaging the rest into separate bills. But anything repackaged into standalone bills would require support from all Senate Democrats, right? And at least 10 Senate Republicans, as well as a separate floor time during an election year, ensuring virtually no chance of enactment this year because the timeline and the number of days that they're in office is more diminished because it's an election year. So there isn't a lot of time to do that, and it's not really feasible given the current situation and climate in DC. So we really need to ensure that housing is included in a small package that is passed through reconciliation. Right now, it's not. We've been having a lot of champions work with us in trying to get it included. Next slide, please. Including Representative Claiborne, Representative Jayapal, Representative Presley, Speaker Nancy Pelosi. They've all gotten on our calls, on our national calls, and spoken about the need to fund affordable housing and how critical it is. And so what you all can do is speak to your members, particularly Senators Blumenthal and Murphy, and just, you can call them, you can email them, and let them know why investments in housing, vouchers, public housing, and a trust fund are so critical, and what you're seeing in your community. And you can cite the rise in rents and all the wonderful statistics that you heard in the previous conversation and the stats that we have, but also stories and sharing the situations that you're seeing and how the current state of affairs is untenable. So that's one way you can do that. You can also tweet. So calling members that are not your members is not effective. They want to hear from their constituents only, but you can tweet at them. So we've tweeted recently at Representative Clyburn and the different supporters of including housing in this small package, thanking them for their support, asking them to continue fighting for housing dollars to be included. And we also have just resources you can share with your networks, including some really cool infographics. And also, if folks are more economically interested in the economic side of things, there's a piece in the Washington Post that cites the housing shortage as a critical driver of inflation. Next slide, please. Oh, and then we also have our housed letter, which has 1,800 national, state, and local organizations signed on. And we would love if y'all could sign on to that too. Just supporting our housed priorities, which I had shown in a previous slide. So most of our advocacy has been focused on Build Back Better. But we also have a situation going on between congressional appropriators in the House and Senate. So there's been a big delay for the fiscal year 22 budget. Currently, it has not been enacted. And congressional appropriators in the House and Senate are continuing to negotiate on this spending package. And they've been pretty much at a stalemate between Democrat and Republican legislators who've disagreed on the funding numbers for the Department of Defense and other programs, and on whether to maintain certain policy provisions included in previous bills. So as a result of that, there's been a continuing resolution which maintains federal funding levels from the previous fiscal year to keep federal programs operating. And the current CR is set to expire on February 18th, at which point Congress will need to pass a spending bill or enact another CR. We really don't want another CR because CRs are very damaging for housing programs. Because of inflation, inflation affects the vouchers, affects housing programs, and so a CR would actually be a loss for affordable housing programs. And so we just urge you all to, again, call your senators and your representatives about this. And I know that you all have great supporters of housing, and that's awesome, right? That's great. But it doesn't mean that you can't call them, because they can put pressure. It's not like, you know, if they say, oh, there's nothing I can do, that's not true. They can talk to their leadership in on appropriations in the House, in the Senate. They can push. And so encouraging them to push is I think really important in this current situation that we're seeing, the stalemate of any funding going through right now, which is incredibly frustrating. And just one last thing about this budget was that there was expanding the Housing Choice Vouchers program was a big part of the House legislation, and it would expand the program. It would help an additional 125,000 households with low incomes, which is huge because that program has never been expanded to that degree before. Next slide, please. And I know we're running low on time, I'm sorry. I just quickly talk about the Erase project, which is ending rental arrears to stop evictions. This is work that we've been doing since the summer, but we've been tracking ERA, you know, when it first came out, and actually we're forefront in getting money to be included in the American Rescue Plan Act and in the Consolidated Appropriations Act. So now that we have this money, we're really trying to ensure that it reaches the lowest income folks, and that there aren't strict policies that prevent people from accessing this funds. And we've been working with a cohort of folks to do that, as well as doing a lot of research and tracking on this. That is it for my part of the presentation. I can come on, and just quickly plugging membership. We're a membership organization, and it helps support our advocacy efforts. And then the last slide is my contact information. Happy to answer any questions from you all, and thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Tori. And I know that you just noted that we're very low on time. I do have a couple questions I was hoping to squeeze in, and then if folks have any additional questions, I'll be sure to include Tori's contact information in the email following this event. So you had mentioned, of course, the passage of the Build Back Better Act would. Sorry, can you hear me? Yep.
Yes,
would result in historic investments in new construction and rehabilitation of existing affordable housing in Connecticut. And you gave us a few ways that that advocates can try and raise to the national level and advocate for that. Is there one piece of that that's absolutely critical? What would be for the folks walking away today, what would be the number one action step they could take?
Yeah, call your senator and ask them to include money back into Build Back Better, and really ask them to be vocal about the need to include housing and to reach out to the leadership and the folks that are negotiating this package, because I mean, like I mentioned earlier, people are getting out of this ERA program and have nowhere to go. We're seeing eviction numbers rise. It's pre-pandemic levels. It's ridiculous. So clearly there is a need for long-term funding. We know that, we're seeing it. And so calling and clogging their voicemails is always a good thing. Also sending them lots of emails is also a good thing. So there's never too much that you can contact, in my belief, there's never too much that you can too many times that you can contact your legislator. And it's also good for them to know who you are and to establish a relationship with those offices.
Great. And I'll be sure, like I mentioned, to include that information in any email that goes out following this.
That would be great.
And then as part of PSC's role as a member organization, we work to amplify the messaging of NLIHC and to connect the work you all are doing at the federal level with the needs of our state. And we do things like having you speak at today's event and sending action alerts and sharing your posts on social media. Can you share a little bit more about the resources that NLIHC provides for state partners, congressional offices, and other advocates? I know you showed a slide of the GAP report and Out of Reach, which are, critical resources that we use all the time at PSC. Can you just share a little bit more about that? And we have about a minute and then we have to wrap up.
Sure, no problem. So one of, I think, the biggest things we provide to our members is resources. We put out a ton of research. We've been doing a lot of amazing work around ERA right now, but we've also done a lot of work on, what these long-term investments would look like for communities and for low-income folks. We also, for our state partners, provide a space for folks to network with other state partners, to hear what's happening across the country and exchange ideas and tips for getting different policy and policy passed. And we're always, I think one of the great things about us too is that our field team is always available. They answer every single email that comes through to them, and we'll set up time to talk to you. So if you want to learn more about the organization, you can reach out to me and I can connect you to them. Yeah, so those are a couple things.
Great, thank you. And I know we have a couple questions in the chat that we're not going to be able to get to today. Sure. But I will make note of the folks who are asking questions and make some connections. So
that would be great. Yeah, that would be great.
Great. So I want to hand it back to Kiley.
Sure. I don't know if you can all see me. Thanks again, everybody, for joining today. I know we had a lot of questions in the chat through our various panels that we didn't get to. So just reminding you that there are a lot of resources on our website between the information that Kiley and Tori just described, one-pagers, research, housing data profiles, housing data on each town. All of that's at www.pschousing.org. And you can also sign up for our listserv there and get information like, again, what Kiley and Tori were just talking about, our agendas and other state legislative information. So thank you, everyone, for jumping on today. Thanks especially to our panelists and to Tori for joining us. We really look forward to working with all of you throughout the upcoming session and as we work to revamp Home Connecticut over the coming year. So please reach out and use us as a resource as much as you can. We're here to support all of you and to support this work that's so important to all of us. So thanks again. Have a great afternoon, everyone.